This video is going to go over traits for reproduction from the introduction until the summary. So the question here that we have is what physical and behavioral traits help organisms reproduce? Our vocabulary words are reproduction, courtship behavior, model, as in a scientific model, and germinate. Remember that when you click on the vocabulary cards, you should be able to quiz yourself on whether or not you understand those vocabulary terms. And so here for the introduction, we have the dusk leaf monkeys who live in the treetops of rainforests in Thailand, Myanmar, and Malaysia. Right? If you're not sure where these are, feel free to look them up on Google Earth or Google Maps. And so like human babies, right? These baby monkeys can't really take care of themselves, and they spend most of the time clinging to their mom, right? Clinging to their fur and drinking the milk that the mom's body provides. And as the monkey grows, it'll develop further traits for survival. It'll have teeth and a mature digestive system. Remember the first week of school, we talked about the digestive system and how our small intestine is about 7 yards long, right? And that digestive system, it goes from our mouth to the esophagus, to the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and colon. And so eventually this little monkey, he will get a mature digestive system that allows them to get energy and nutrients from leaves. But until then, its mom will take care, clean, feed, and protect the baby. And so it makes you wonder, why would the mother take care of its baby when doing so doesn't really help the survival of the mom, right? And so some students answer that, maybe it's because they want the species to survive, right? Taking care of the next generation will help this species survive. Perhaps other students thought that, when the mom gets older and the baby gets older, maybe at some point the baby who's no longer a baby can take care of the older monkey. And so here we learned about traits for survival, right? In lesson 1, traits for survival help an organism meet its needs, right, from its environment. In this lesson, lesson 2, traits for reproduction, we are going to learn about physical and behavioral traits that help an organism find a mate and reproduce, or help it take care of its offspring. First, we'll talk about how animals' reproductive traits increase the chance of producing offspring that survive. Then we're going to talk about how a group of wildlife biologists use their understanding of reproductive traits in California at the point during which California condors were almost extinct. And so they use this engineering process to help save this endangered species. We'll also think about how plants' reproductive traits produce a new generation of plants. And as we read, I want us to think about the cause and effect relationships, right? When you have a cause and effect relationships, we're thinking about how one event can influence another. So in this case, we're looking at how reproductive traits can influence or affect the survival of offspring. And so the question we're looking at is, how does the behavior of dusky leaf monkey mothers relate to future generations of dusky leaf monkeys? And so here we have section 1, animal physical traits for reproduction. And so here, this is a male peafowl, aka a peacock, right? And so in the past, we've seen videos about the female kangaroo with its joey in the pouch. We also have seen a peacock's tail, right? And how it can show off its tail to a potential mate. Both of these are examples of physical traits. Unlike physical traits for survival for the peacock and kangaroo, these are physical traits that help these organisms or living things, right, take care of their offspring. Reproduction, for the purpose of this class, is referring to the process by which an organism, a living thing, makes more organisms of the same species. Remember that Only organisms of the same species are the ones that can reproduce with each other, right? For this reason, right, the horse and a donkey, when they mate and make a mule, right, they can't make future generations of mules because mules are infertile or not fertile. If organisms did not reproduce, their species would die out and become extinct. Reproductive traits increase the chance or probability that an organism will find a mate for reproduction or have offspring that will survive, right? They increase the chance. They don't necessarily guarantee the chance of reproduction or finding a mate, but they do help, right? And so they mention that here, they don't guarantee that an organism will actually reproduce. A peacock's tail and a kangaroo's pouch are both examples of physical reproductive traits. Make sure you work on this section and these questions. And so section 2, animal behavioral traits for reproduction. Like traits for survival, both physical and behavioral traits, right, also are present for reproduction, right? We talked about physical and behavioral traits for survival. There are physical and behavioral traits for reproduction. Peacocks, they don't just have large, colorful tails, right? They also strut around and shake their rear ends to attract a female's attention. In a group of peacocks, though, how does one male stand out as a better mate than other males? And then so many animal species have reproductive traits that help them find or attract a potential mate. There are peacocks who are better at attracting the attention of the female by fanning out their large tail and strutting around, right? And so these peacocks, the ones who are showing off their tails and strutting around, they're more likely to reproduce, right? Because they're around more and they're out there. And so any behavior or way of acting in a way that helps an animal attract a mate is called courtship behavior, right? The word courtship is from a term back then when people used to court each other. They would try to win the affection of another person. And so this is a term from back then. And so this is kind of the same thing as dating, right? But here we're talking about dating behaviors in animals, right? Any way of acting that, animals are trying to attract a mate. And so there are different kinds of courtship behaviors. We're going to talk about a few of them. I want you to keep in mind how each is a part of a cause and effect relationship, right? And again, that's a relationship between two events in which one will influence another. The behavior is the cause. So whatever the animal is doing, maybe they're dancing, maybe they're showing off their feathers, right? The behavior is the cause, and the effect is how likely that organism will get to mate. And so if you've seen fireflies before, right, one thing about them is that they flash their lights, right? One type of courtship behavior is flashing signals like lights. And so there are a lot of species of fireflies, and generally many different species can't mate with each other. Only fireflies of the same species can mate with each other. Fireflies have the structure in their abdomen or their stomach area that produces light, right? And each species of fireflies uses its light in a specific pattern. And so when a male firefly flashes its lights in a particular pattern, a female of the same species that is ready to mate is going to flash back the same pattern to communicate where she is. Females of other firefly species aren't going to respond because it doesn't make sense. If they mate, it's not going to result in offspring. Releasing chemicals and sounds are also examples of courtship behavior, right? And so many animal species release chemicals from their body as a way to attract a mate. This happens in humans too, right? We wear perfume and cologne, right? The chemicals act like a perfume to attract an animal of the same species. Sounds also can attract potential mates. Birds will sing, frogs will croak, and koalas will bellow, right? And often the male will be the one making the mating sounds. and other individuals of different species, they don't really care about this. They don't respond. Right. And so here we're looking at a moose's large antlers, and they are an example of a physical reproductive trait. They indicate to a female that this male is strong and healthy, and it could impress the female, which could increase the chance that he'll reproduce. Fighting is another type of courtship behavior. Sometimes the male species have to fight other males of that species to win a mate. So this happens in male lions, gorillas, deer, and moose. They all fight for potential mates. The large antlers help the male deer and moose drive away or kill any rivals. And so typically the strongest and healthiest male will usually win the fight. And so he wins the chance to mate and produce offspring. Strength size and antler size are all indications to a female that the male is healthy and is going to pass down these traits to the offspring. Courtship behavior is pretty complex though, because you have some animals that will dance, right? Like the blue-footed booby that we saw, right? Or some of them can create artwork as a form of courtship behavior. So these male bowerbirds over here, they're going to build nests, and they collect bits of glass, feathers, flower petals, and bits of plastic and ribbons from the environment, and they decorate their nests or their bower. Right. And so each bower is a unique shape, and typically they pick a single color. And when a female approaches, will pick up an item with his beak and will dance with it to attract her. Right. She'll mate with the male that has the best dance and has the most impressive display of objects around its elaborate nest. Courtship behaviors and other reproductive traits, again, they don't guarantee that an individual will find and recognize a potential mate. They don't guarantee that they'll produce offspring, but they increase the chances that both of these things will happen and that that species could survive better in the future. Section 3 is talking about improving chances of animal offspring survival. And so organisms, they go through a lot of effort to find a mate and reproduce. There are, let me click on the star for my main ideas. There are 2 different strategies or approaches that organisms use to mate. One of them is create a lot of offspring, right? So for example, female sea turtles, they'll lay hundreds or thousands of eggs because fewer than 1 in 1,000 of our offspring will survive and grow up to reproduce. And so mother sea turtles, they don't really take care of their eggs or offspring. And so when the babies hatch, they're just going to crawl to the sea on their own. Sometimes the eggs never hatch. Sometimes the baby sea turtles, they get eaten on the way to the sea. Or even if they make it to the ocean, they could be eaten by larger fish or other marine animals. And so some animal species like the sea turtle, they don't really care for their young. So they rely on making a lot of eggs to increase the probability or the chance that some of the offspring will survive. Another approach is for an organism to have fewer offspring. We fall in this category, humans, right? But the trade-off is that we need to take care of these offspring. In these cases, the odds or the chances that each offspring will survive is much greater because we're spending a lot of time taking care of that offspring. And so species that do this have traits that help them care for their young. So for example, musk oxen, these guys here, are large animals that live in the Arctic tundra. Females have 1 baby at a time, and so it gets a lot of care, right? The mother will feed her baby with her milk. To stay warm, the baby will rest it against its mother's long hair. And if there's any danger, right, the adults in the herd will form a circle around the young to protect them. And so that predator has to go through this wall of musk oxen before they get to the baby there. Section 4, we're going to talk about engineering design, right? Designing processes for condor recovery. And so scientists in around 1982 realized that there were only 22 California condors. So these birds right here. And so they are a vulture. They're a type of vulture, right? Which eat dead matter or, organisms that are, roadkill. And so they are also known as scavengers. California condors were dying, and scientists realized that if they didn't design solutions to help them increase their numbers, the species would end up becoming extinct. And so the criterion, aka the singular form of criteria, kind of like phenomenon and phenomena, right? Let me write that down here. Right, so phenomenon versus phenomena. This is plural and this is singular, right? And again, both of them refer to an observable event. So this could be anything that we can see or hear, which can lead us to ask questions, right? And so the criterion or the let's see, here we go. All right. The criterion, right, the singular form of criteria, the requirement that the scientists wanted to meet was to eventually have a self-sustaining wild population of condors, right? And so this would mean that this population of birds would be able to reproduce and continue to survive without the help of humans. And so that was their goal. Designing solutions for condor reproduction. So since the condors weren't reproducing enough for the species to survive, the scientists decided to bring them into captivity. And so they would bring them into a zoo, right? And so we'll talk about that in a bit. One large constraint or limitation that the scientists faced is that condors only lay one egg per year, right? But some of the scientists discovered that if you remove the egg before it hatches, the mother condor actually lays another egg. So that increases it to 2 eggs per year, right? It laid twice as many eggs this way if you took one egg out of the nest before it hatched. And so the baby condors, they were raised in zoos until they were old enough to survive on their own. And so after a while, right, the scientists would release them into the wild, right? And in order to figure out how to teach them how to handle the dangers of the natural wild environment that they would be in, they had to teach the condors how to avoid dangers that would be in the environment, right? And so they designed this zoo, which would act as a model for the condor's natural environment. Scientific models are just representations of something in the real world, right? So they're copies or replicas, right? You can think about a poster, that's a 2D model. Think about your science projects in the past, right? If you ever made a model of a volcano, the solar system, things like that, or a model of plate tectonics, right? Those would all count as a scientific model. And so models are representations of something in the real world that make important aspects easier to observe, and they hide unimportant aspects. And so scientists had to improve upon the model habitat every time they learned more about how to help the condors survive. And so when they first released the condors, they died because humans or human activities would kill them. And so the solution to that problem was to improve the model by helping the condors recognize how they should avoid humans and stay closer to condors. And so they made puppets that fed and took care of the baby condors, and this helped the condors associate the other condors with good things like being fed and not necessarily humans. And anytime they would be around humans, the humans would try to scare them. And so this would help them increase the chances that they would survive. And so they would send them out into the wild again. And unfortunately, the condors started running into power lines, right? And so to improve their scientific model, the zoo, they had to add fake power lines to the zoo habitat, right? And every time a young condor would fly near the power lines, they would receive a small shock, saying that they got too close, and that's not a good idea. And so these shocks weren't enough to injure them, but they were enough to make them feel uncomfortable. And so you'll see that over time, there were several solutions that helped the condors reproduce and survive, right? They were tested, the solutions were tested and modified or changed over a lot of years, right? And so that they would become self-sustaining. And so you could even Google, amount of California condors today, right? It should be more than 22. I think it's around 200 or 500, depending on your source. Let's go to section 5. And so plants, right? We're going to talk about plant traits for reproduction. They help our environment with their vibrant colors, right? They smell good. But like animals, right, they also have traits that increase the probability or chance that they're actually going to reproduce and have offspring, right? And so plants, they are organisms and they actually reproduce as well. They don't seem to show courtship behavior, right, like animals, because they're not going to fly to another flower. They don't have feet, right? But they do have physical traits that help with the reproduction, that aid in the reproduction. So pollen, right? Some of us are allergic to pollen. Pollen is a structure that many species of plants use for reproduction. The male part of a flower will produce the pollen. The small size of the pollen is a physical trait that allows it to get trapped into the animal's bodies or get carried in the wind. When pollen reaches the female part of a flower, a seed can form. So all flowers have male and female parts, right? And so again, the pollen is made from the male part of the flower. And when it's pollinated, right, when it's brought to another flower, typically, it could be the same flower, but it could be typically is brought to another flower by the wind, air, water, or maybe another animal, right? Then you can form a seed or a baby flower. Seeds are basically the offspring of a plant that can develop into a new adult plant. Flowers also are reproductive structures, right? Plants use animals to increase the chances of reproducing. You have insects like bees and butterflies that visit the flowers to collect the sweet nectar, right? And so every time these bees or butterflies are going from flower to flower, they're transferring some of the pollen onto their bodies and they're moving it to another flower, right? And so that helps in that process of bringing the pollen, which is made from the male part of one flower, to the female part of another flower. Some kinds of plants, such as pine and spruce trees, they don't have flowers, right? They produce pollen in the form of cones, right? So pine tree pollen, they have different physical reproductive traits. The pine trees rely on the wind to pick up their pollen instead of insects, right? These pine tree pollens, they have wings, so it floats in the wind a little bit better. And so traits for offspring survival, right? So here's our next vocab word, germinate. For the offspring's best chance of survival, the seeds formed inside flowers must be carried to a location where they can germinate without competing with the parent plant for light, water, space, and nutrients. To germinate means to begin growth of a new plant from a seed, right? To germinate is to basically grow from a seed. So notice germinate has a G and an R, right? It kind of spells the beginning of grow, right? So we're growing from a seed. Every time you see the word germinate, that's what that means. Because seeds can't move on their own, plants have different traits that help with seed dispersal. To disperse means to spread out, right? To send the seeds out everywhere. Seeds could be dispersed by wind, water, and animals, right? So the wind will have structures will often have seeds that are dispersed by the wind. These seeds typically have structures that are like parachutes. Think about the dandelion, right? And so the dandelion, they fly in the wind pretty easily. Water will also carry fruits and seeds to new locations where they can germinate and grow. And seeds, they can also be dispersed or sent through different places by animals. And so this right here, these are burdock plants that have seeds which have hooks on them, and they get caught onto animals' fur pretty easily. And so once they're caught into an animal's fur, that animal will travel to a new location, and that the seed will fall off, and they can grow there. If the conditions are right for growth, right, it'll germinate and grow. But not all seeds are going to be able to germinate, right? So some of them might end up on poor, dry soil, right? And so there could not be enough light for plant growth. Some of them birds eat, right? Other animals will enjoy them, and so those won't have the chance to germinate. Plant seeds also have traits that help prevent them from being eaten. So like, for example, nuts are large seeds that have hard shells. And so this doesn't guarantee that they're not going to be eaten by another animal, but does increase the chances that they're going to survive a little bit longer. One last way to increase the chance that some seeds will germinate is to produce more seeds. The more seeds a plant species has, the better the chance that at least some of the plant's offspring are going to survive. And so remember to play this video, the key science concept, when you get here. And finally, section 6, passing on reproductive traits. I'm gonna click on the main ideas. This right here is a peacock spider displaying its colorful back, and it's typically going to dance around with its hind legs to attract a female. A lot of physical and behavioral traits that lead to reproduction or care of offspring are passed from parent to offspring, right? So these traits, like this colorful display here and its dance, they're passed on through genetics, right? DNA and genetics. Organisms that survive and attract mates have useful traits that make them more likely to reproduce. And so behavioral traits like a mating dance can also be passed down, right? A lot of these traits for survival and traits for reproduction, typically they're passed down from parent to offspring through genetics or DNA. And so when you get to the summary section, be sure to read this or have the book read it to you to make sure that you're understanding the main ideas from each of the sections. If this is all good to you, I want you to go back to lesson 1, go to the summary for lesson 1, and double check that you understand all of the points here. And if anything here is unclear, then go back to that section and try to figure out whatever it is that is unclear to you. Okay.